Welcome to this video about the demand curve. My name's Chris and I've been a teacher for about 27 years and I've taught business studies, economics and ICT throughout that time. So we're going to look tonight at the demand curve. Let me just move my slide on. So our learning aims in this video are to understand what the demand curve looks like, understand how to label a demand diagram, and understand what can cause the demand curve to shift left or right. So let's have a look at what demand is to start with. So demand refers to the amount of a good or service someone is willing to purchase at each price. Demand is based on needs and wants. A need is something you need to survive, so food, shelter, clothing, and a want is something you could survive without. So for instance, a mobile phone, a Ferrari, whatever. A consumer may be able to differentiate between a need and a want, but in terms of economists, they're the same thing. Demand is also based on the ability to pay. So I can pay for a chocolate bar, I can't buy myself a Ferrari unless I win the lottery later. So there's my Ferrari. Let's have a look what effective demand is. So effective demand is a demand that can be acted upon. So as I said previously, I could quite easily go out now and buy myself a bar of chocolate. I've got the money in my pocket. So that's effective demand. Latent demand is my demand for that Ferrari. I want a Ferrari, but I haven't got the money to buy a Ferrari. So that want will have to go unsatisfied, and it's latent demand because I have no ability to pay for that good. Now, what we're going to focus on in this video is effective demand, demand that we can act upon. So the demand curve, you'll notice we've put it in inverted commas curve because tonight we're going to look at it as a straight line, not a curve. You'll notice we've got two axes. I'm just going to draw on this now. The x-axis, hang on a second, the x-axis here and the y-axis. Now it's important to use a ruler and you draw your diagrams in your schoolwork and in your exam work large enough so everything can be seen quite easily. There's a lot of marks given for good diagrams. I've been an examiner for exam boards and economics, and I know that we need to draw good detailed diagrams that are easily read. So our next stage is we need to label this diagram. So if I just get my mouse up and we move this on, the bottom axis is labeled as the quantity and the y-axis on the side is labeled as price. We can now draw our demand curve into the diagram. Now, we can see it's sloping from left to right. The reason being is you've got a high price up here. If I write in there, high price, and a low price down here. So the higher the price, the less of a product a person can buy. And when it's low, we can buy more. I'm just going to clear those drawings. So hopefully that makes sense. So if the price falls, we will buy more of a product. So let's see that in action. So P to P1, our price has fallen, and we've drawn our dotted lines across the demand curve. And when it hits the demand curve, we drop down to quantity, and that's how much we would demand at price P1. We can see we've drawn an arrow here showing how demand has extended along the curve. So the price has dropped, P to P1, quantity has increased from Q to Q1. So that's the quantity demanded of that product. Price fallen, quantity demanded has gone up. I'm just going to clear all my drawings again. Not sure why that's not working. Hang on a second. Right, we'll move on. So if we go in the other direction, if the price increases from P to P2, we will have a contraction along the demand curve. So if the price goes up, fewer people will be able to afford this product. So we move from Q to Q2. So the price goes up from P to P2. Quantity will go down from Q to Q2. And that's shown as a movement along the demand curve, and that's a contraction of the demand curve. So that's all well and good when prices change, but what if other things happen? This is where we shift the demand curve. So we've got our diagram here with our price and the quantity labeled and the demand curve labeled. Notice how in each diagram I'm labeling the bottom of the demand curve. That's just tradition. Some people do label at the top, but most textbooks and diagrams label the demand curve at the bottom. Okay, so try and get into that habit that the demand curve is labeled at the bottom. So we've got some things that can cause a shift in the demand curve. I've got some pictures there: coronavirus, Father Christmas at Christmas, and hot sunny weather and ice creams. So let's have a look. What causes a shift in demand? Well, a shift in demand can be caused by a change in income. As I said earlier, if I won the lottery tonight, then I might go out and buy a Ferrari tomorrow. So my income would have changed, and that would change my habit in terms of spending, and I could buy more of the expensive products that I quite like to buy. So maybe a Ferrari, maybe a new computer, maybe a new phone, maybe go on holiday, maybe a new house. But change in income can change how I spend. Changing in population, well, simply if there's more people in the population, then there's more people out there to demand your products. So price may not have changed, but if we have an increase in population, then the demand curve can shift. Likewise, if the population falls, then demand can shift to the left. Weather, hot, sunny weather. I bet if you go down to the shops, you can see that all the barbecue stuff has been taken off the shelves. The price hasn't changed, but the demand has. So nice, hot, sunny weather, people rush out and buy all the barbecue food. No bread rolls for your burgers or your hot dogs left on the shelves. Influencers. You all follow influencers on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, and they often advertise or promote products on their channels, and you might go out and buy those products because you've seen them advertised on the social media. Public health scare. Well, we've got currently in a COVID crisis. We've had other crises in the past, like scares about eggs, scares about the quality of meat in frozen products, and those scares trigger demand for a certain product or reduce the demand for a certain product. So in the case of COVID, the demand for face masks has shifted to the right, so more masks are being demanded at the same price. The season. I don't buy Christmas trees during the summer, I buy them at Christmas. I don't buy pumpkins in the spring. I buy them in the autumn to celebrate Halloween. So the season will affect demand. Fashion, changes in fashion will also affect demand. So some things will come in and out of fashion, and you can see a shift in that demand. So let's have a look at what that will look like in reality. So we're going to shift the demand curve here. And you can see my demand curve is shifted over to the right. The price has not changed. Something else has changed. So it could be that it's hot, sunny weather and everyone's going to have a barbecue. So those burgers, those hot dogs are flying off the shelves. We've got an increase in demand, but the price has remained the same. And you can see that curve has shifted across. You'll notice also, and I'll just draw on this now, you've got this arrow here. It isn't facing upwards like that. It's going across because it's showing a shift directly across. It's a parallel line to the previous line, shifting the demand from D to D1. Price remains the same. Quantity has increased from Q to Q1. So it's important you keep this simple, you keep it neat, you keep it tidy. Plenty of straight lines, connecting the lines across, and you're showing that increase in quantity. Just clear my drawings. So you can see that this here, that space between Q and Q1 shows the increase in demand that has happened. Q to Q1. I'll just clear my drawings again and we'll move on to the next slide. Oh, jump too far. So here we go. This time, it could be that we've got a really warm September, October, November, and the demand for woolly jumpers just isn't there. No one wants to buy a woolly jumper because it's too warm. So the demand has shifted backwards. The price hasn't changed. Those woolly jumpers are the same price, and we're shifting the demand curve backwards, Q2 to Q1. Likewise, this could be about foreign holidays at the moment. During the COVID crisis, the demand has shifted backwards because nobody wants to risk going on holiday just in case they can't get back into the country without having to isolate. So the price hasn't changed for those holidays, but the demand is shifting backwards, Q to Q2, and again, we've got the amount that it shifted there. So between those 2 points is how much demand has shifted and fallen at that price. I'll just clear all of that. And we'll move on. So we've got a real world example. In 2018, Scotland introduced a minimum price per unit for alcohol of 50p to reduce alcohol consumption. So you don't pay that 50p for the whole bottle, it's per unit of alcohol. Now, this was aimed at reducing the consumption of cheap alcohol, such as this White Lightning, big bottle of cider. So it should reduce the consumption of cheap alcohol. So it didn't affect the price of expensive whiskies, wines, lagers, beers, etc. It was aimed at reducing the consumption of the cheap ciders and beers. So obviously, setting 50p as the minimum price increased the price of these cheap ciders and beers. And because of that, you are moving the price, and in theory, what should happen is the consumption of those products would actually shift and go down from Q to Q1. So the increase in price from P to P1 is shown as a shift, sorry, not a shift, a contraction of the demand curve, because the people on lower incomes could not afford to purchase as much alcohol as they were previously, because the minimum price had increased to 50p. This has been an effective measure in Scotland and has reduced the amount of issues with alcohol in the Scottish society. So that's a good example to use. So let's move on to our next slide. Here we can see legislation has been brought in where face masks must be worn in shops during the pandemic. And when Boris announced that, demand for masks shifted strongly to the right. Price remained the same, but demand for masks shifted strongly to the right as it was made law that you had to wear them in shops and confined spaces like schools. So you can see that shift from Q to Q1 was caused by the demand curve shifting to the right, D to D1. Now I'm sure as legislation changes, that demand will shift back to the left and the price will remain the same for masks. So let me clear my drawings again and I'll move us on to the next slide. So we're looking at what would happen if. So what would happen if we had a heat wave? Oh, and we're looking at the sale of coats. Well, if there's a sale of coats, well, if there's a heat wave, nobody wants a coat. So what's going to happen is we're going to shift the demand from D to D1 and Q to Q2. Notice my labels are changing slightly. It doesn't matter as long as you label them appropriately. And so you can refer to it when you're writing about the diagram in the text. Big screen TVs during Euro 2020. What do you think will happen to sales of those big screen TVs? Well, demand's going to be increased, isn't it? While people want to buy a big screen TV to watch the football on. And you can see the price hasn't changed, but the demand for those TVs has shifted from D to D1. Reflected in the shift from Q to Q1. Price remains the same, remember. Next example, school uniforms. Every August, you see shops full of school uniform. Price doesn't change, but because of the time of year, because of the season, parents want to rush out and buy new uniforms for their children. Again, a shift of D from D to D1, Q to Q1. Price remains the same. Price of school trousers and school uniform remains the same throughout the year, but when you get to August, demand shifts across to the right, causing an increase in quantity being consumed at the same price. Last example, sun cream, and we have a horrible summer. Sales for sun cream. Well, we're going to shift back again. Demand for sun cream will shift to the left and quantity demanded will reduce, but the price will stay the same. We just won't be buying it. It'll stay on the shelves. So, mistakes in exams. Here we can see in a diagram that someone's put together. We can see that there are things missing. Commonly happens in exam questions where people miss out labels or miss out parts of the diagram. So if you want to pause the video, you can actually guess at what was missing here. So the answers that are missing here, quantity. the axis isn't labeled properly. The dotted lines drawn across from P to the demand curves, they were missing. The arrow was pointing upwards. It should have been pointing across from D to D1, showing that shift to the left. Draw the lines from the Q curve to meet the demand curve. Label everything. Both demand curves are labeled. Draw the diagram big, nice and big, and refer to the diagram in your written answer. It's no good just drawing the diagram and not referring to that diagram. You've got to explain what's happening in the diagram in your exam answers. That's how you will get the best marks. Now, hopefully, we've understood now what the demand curve looks like, how to label that diagram, and what things can cause a shift to the left or the right of that demand curve. Hopefully that's helped you. Good luck.